Shoot him in the legs first. I want him screaming when his team surrenders. The commander pressed his boot onto the wounded SEAL's chest and leaned down slowly, not to help, to watch him struggle to breathe. He smiled the kind of smile that had nothing human left inside it and spoke loud enough for every trapped American soldier to hear clearly. I have done this 17 times. Not one of them survived. He straightened up, looked at his men surrounding the valley, and gave a single quiet order. No prisoners. Make it last. Then he turned his back on them, like they were already dead, like the outcome was already written. If you believe some people aren't worth fighting for, stay until the very end. Subscribe now and drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story reaches. Lieutenant Ethan Walker had survived 2 combat deployments in Afghanistan, 1 in Iraq, and a classified operation in West Africa that the government still refused to acknowledge on paper. He had been shot at by people who knew what they were doing. He had been ambushed by fighters who studied American tactics for years. He had been in situations so bad that the only thing keeping him alive was the man next to him and the instinct that never completely turned off even during sleep. But standing at the edge of the Redwood National Forest in Northern California, looking out at 300,000 acres of dense wilderness and listening to the silence, a silence that felt deliberately engineered rather than natural, something moved in his gut that he had not felt in a long time. It felt like dread. Walker, Chief Petty Officer Marcus Reed, appeared at his shoulder, voice low, the way it always got when Reed was processing something and not yet ready to say it out loud. Reed was 6'2" broad as a doorway and had the kind of face that looked like it had been cut from quarry stone. He had served alongside Walker for 6 years. They did not need to use many words between them. A tone, a glance, a silence that lasted half a second too long. It was enough. I know, Walker said. Brief said 15 to 20 security personnel, Max, Reed said. Local contractors, not organized, not trained. I know what the brief said. This doesn't feel like 15 people. Walker looked at the tree line again. The pine stood perfectly still. No birds. No wind through the upper branches, just that engineered silence pressing down like a hand on the chest. No, Walker agreed, it doesn't. Behind them, Petty Officer Second Class Jake Collins was running a final equipment check, moving through each item with the mechanical efficiency of a man who had done this ritual so many times it had become something close to prayer. Collins was 29 years old, the youngest on the team, and still carried a certain brightness in his eyes that combat had not yet finished erasing. He was good, genuinely good, the kind of operator who made everyone around him better without trying to. Petty Officer First Class Ryan Foster sat on a fallen log and tightened the laces on his left boot with focused attention. Foster was the team's communications specialist. He had a gift for staying calm when systems failed and for finding solutions in situations where the textbook offered nothing useful. He was also, though he rarely spoke about it, the father of a 7-year-old girl named Lily, who drew pictures of him in his uniform and taped them to the refrigerator door back home in Virginia. Foster, Walker said, "Comms check." Foster lifted the radio handset and ran through the frequencies, his voice quiet and professional, as he made contact with the extraction team, stage 6 miles east. All clear. Signal strong. Backup team is in a position. 30-minute extraction window confirmed. Good. Walker turned back to the tree line. We go in clean. Standard reconnaissance pattern. Nobody fires unless fired upon. We document the exchange, collect whatever intelligence we can, and we come back out. No heroics, no complications. When does it ever go that way? Collins said, not looking up from his gear. Today it does, Walker said, because I said so. Collins smiled but kept his mouth shut. It was the right answer. They entered the forest at 06:12 hours on a Tuesday morning in late October. The plan was simple. The operation had been built on 3 weeks of aerial surveillance, 2 weeks of signal intelligence, and a detailed briefing from a federal agency that Walker's unit was not officially supposed to be working with. A criminal network international in reach, violent in method, and careful enough in operation that law enforcement had spent 4 years building a case without ever quite closing the distance, had been using the abandoned logging infrastructure deep in the California wilderness to move weapons, not small weapons, not handguns and hunting rifles being traded for cash. Military-grade equipment, shoulder-fired missiles, encrypted communication hardware. The kind of inventory that made federal analysts wake up at 3 in the morning with their hearts pounding. Someone high enough in the government had decided that the agencies were moving too slowly. Someone had decided to send people who moved faster. Walker's team was those people. The mission was reconnaissance only. Get eyes on the exchange. Document the personnel. Gather intelligence that could anchor a legal case or, if necessary, justify something less legal. Get out without being seen. 40 minutes into the forest, Walker raised his fist and the team stopped. He did not say anything for 8 full seconds. Then he said very quietly, "We have eyes on us." Nobody questioned it. Nobody asked how he knew. In 6 years of working together, Marcus Reed had learned that when Walker said something in that tone, the correct response was to believe it immediately and act. They shifted formation without speaking. Collins moved left. Foster moved right. Reed tightened the gap between himself and Walker to 3 feet. Every weapon came up to a ready position. Not raised, not aimed, ready. The difference between those two things was the difference between starting a fight and being prepared to finish one. Contact, Collins said, the single word coming out flat and controlled. 300 meters ahead movement in the trees. Not animal movement, not the random shifting of wildlife. Deliberate, coordinated, the movement of people who had a plan. How many, Reed asked? Collins watched through his scope for 4 seconds. Can't get a count. Too much cover. Estimate. More than the brief said. Walker made a decision in under 2 seconds. Fall back to the secondary rally point. We reassess and the forest erupted. The sound was enormous and immediate, a wall of noise that hit before the mind could fully process it. Gunfire from the left, gunfire from the right. An explosion somewhere behind them that lifted dirt and debris 30 feet into the air and knocked Foster off his feet. The ambush was not the work of 15 local contractors. The ambush was the work of people who had studied military tactics, who had studied specifically how American special operations teams moved and thought and reacted, and who had spent time, real time, preparing this exact trap for this exact team. Contact left, contact right, we're flanked. Collins' voice cut through the noise with perfect clarity. Move, move, move. Walker was already moving, staying low, returning fire with controlled efficiency, not burning ammunition in panic, but placing rounds with the mechanical precision of a man whose training was running the moment his conscious mind stepped back. Reed grabbed Foster, who had gone down hard from the explosion. "Foster, you with me, Foster?" Foster's face was pale. His leg was wrong. The angle was wrong and the blood was wrong, and Reed knew immediately that the communications specialist was not going to be running anywhere. "I'm here," Foster said through his teeth. "I'm here, don't stop. You're hit. I know I'm hit. Keep moving." Reed pulled Foster's arm across his shoulders and lifted him, taking most of the man's weight, and they ran. The canyon appeared in front of them, like a trap within a trap. The terrain, which the briefing maps had described as an open valley with multiple extraction routes, was nothing like the briefing maps. Someone had altered the intelligence. Someone had fed them false terrain data. The valley was actually a narrow corridor of rock and old-growth timber with walls on 3 sides and the enemy closing the 4th. They were not being driven back. They were being herded. "They knew," Reed said, breathing hard, scanning over Foster's shoulder for threats. "Walker, they knew the route. They knew the whole route." Walker processed this without breaking stride. "We deal with what's in front of us. What's in front of us is about 60 armed men and no exit. Then we find an exit." They reached a cluster of fallen timber, ancient redwoods, brought down by a winter storm years ago, and went to ground behind it. The cover was not perfect, but it was real. Walker took stock of the situation with the rapid, emotionless assessment he had trained himself to perform regardless of circumstances. 4 operators, 1 severely wounded, 2 exits confirmed blocked, 3rd exit unknown, but likely blocked given the sophistication of the ambush. Ammunition at starting levels minus what had been expended in the first contact. Radio communication. Walker looked at Foster, who was already pulling at the handset with a face tight with pain and focus. "Foster, comms." Foster pressed the transmit button. Static. He tried the backup frequency. Static. He ran through every frequency available, working through the list with methodical patience while his leg bled onto the pine needles beneath him. Nothing. "They're jamming us," Foster said. Broadband jamming. Someone in this network has military-grade electronic warfare equipment. The information landed in the group like a stone in still water. Which means they had help getting it, Collins said. This isn't a criminal network running weapons. This is later, Walker said. We figure that out later. Right now, I need options. We could push north, Reed offered. The ridge is steep, but it's not impossible. If we can get above the tree line, we might get a signal through. They'll anticipate the ridge. They anticipated everything else. Then what? Walker was quiet for 3 seconds. In the world he operated in, 3 seconds of silence from a team leader felt like an hour. Collins watched him. Reed watched him. Even Foster, flat on his back with his leg wrapped in a field dressing that was already soaking through, turned his head and watched him. We hold, Walker said. Hold, Collins repeated. We hold this position, we make every shot count, and we wait. Wait for what? Nobody knows we're here. Comms are jammed. The extraction team will know something's wrong when we miss the check-in window. They'll escalate. It takes time, but they will escalate. How much time? Reed asked. Walker did not answer immediately because the honest answer was too much time. More time than 4 men in their current position could realistically survive without a significant change in circumstances. But he did not say that. Enough, he said instead. We hold. The enemy did not rush them. That was the most frightening part. Another force less disciplined, less intelligent in their tactics would have charged the position and ended it, quickly trading casualties for speed. These men did no such thing. They set up firing positions with calm efficiency. They established fields of fire that covered every approach in every escape route. They communicated through hand signals and short radio bursts in a language that Collins identified as a European dialect mixed with something he could not place. These aren't contractors, Collins said, watching through his scope. Look at how they move. These are trained soldiers, former military, professional. How many, Walker asked? I've got 30 confirmed. Could be more in the trees. Reed fired twice, forcing back a pair of enemy soldiers who had been advancing on the right flank. We're burning ammunition. I know. Walker, at this rate of exchange, we've got maybe 20 minutes of effective resistance. After that, we're down to sidearms. Walker nodded. His jaw was tight. His eyes were moving, constantly scanning, calculating, never settling. 20 minutes. That was what they had. Then the radio crackled. Not the team radio. Not the military encrypted handset that the jamming had silenced. The enemy radio. One of the enemy fighters, a large man with close-cropped hair, who moved with the authority of someone in command, stepped into a partial clearing and brought a long-range radio to his mouth. He spoke in English, clearly, deliberately, as though he wanted to be heard. You are surrounded. Nobody is coming for you. Your communications are dead. Your backup team has been redirected by false orders. There is no rescue. He paused. You are 4 men. You are wounded. You are running out of ammunition. I respect what you are. I have worked with men like you. This is not about pride. This is about mathematics. Another pause. Put down your weapons. Stand up with your hands visible. I give you my word that you will be treated as prisoners, not as corpses. You have 60 seconds to decide. Silence. The 4 SEALs looked at each other across the fallen timber. Foster spoke first, his voice calm despite everything. I'm not surrendering. Nobody's surrendering, Walker said. I just wanted to be clear, Foster said. In case anyone was considering it, I'm not. Reed Walker looked at his second. I've got 12 rounds in this magazine and 2 in reserve, Reed said. Tell me where you want them. Collins. Collins had not taken his eye from his scope since the commander's speech ended. Walker, look at the ridge. Walker lifted his own scope. The enemy commander was still standing in the clearing, waiting for an answer. His men had formed up around him, disciplined and ready, waiting for the order to finish what they had started. And then the enemy commander's head snapped back. The sound reached them a fraction of a second later. A single suppressed rifle shot its crack, muffled but distinct, coming from somewhere high and far. The enemy commander dropped to the ground. For 1 full second, nobody moved. Not the enemy soldiers, not Walker's team. The entire forest froze in a collective moment of stunned disbelief. Then a second shot. The man with the machine gun on the eastern ridge, a position that had been making Reed's life extremely difficult for the past 15 minutes, convulsed and went still. Third shot. A fighter who had been advancing low and fast through the underbrush on the left flank dropped without a sound. The enemy broke, not in the panicked, disorganized way of undisciplined men. They broke in the controlled professional way of soldiers who recognized a tactical problem and responded to it, pulling back, seeking cover, changing their orientation to face a threat they could not yet locate. But they broke nonetheless. The pressure on Walker's position dropped from crushing to manageable in the span of perhaps 40 seconds. "Someone's shooting at them," Collins said, the observation delivered with a slight note of wonder that he could not quite suppress. "From the high ground, northeast. How far? 300 yards minimum. Maybe more." Collins paused. "That's an exceptional shot." "Multiple shots," Reed corrected, "every one of them placed." Walker stared at the ridge. The shooter had not revealed themselves. No muzzle flash visible. No movement in the trees. Whoever was up there had chosen their position with the kind of care that came from experience and was maintaining that position with the kind of discipline that came from training. "Who is it?" Reed asked. "Does it matter right now?" Walker replied. "I suppose not." "Then let's use this. Collins with me. Reed, you've got Foster. We move in 30 seconds. "Move where?" Walker pointed toward the northern slope, the route Reed had suggested earlier, the route Walker had dismissed as too predictable. "You said the ridge was steep, but not impossible," Walker said. "Yeah, I said that." "Then let's go find out." They went over the top of the fallen timber at a dead run. Walker and Collins went first, firing as they moved, covering angles and suppressing enemy positions that had been weakened by whoever was shooting from above. Reed came behind them with Foster leaning heavily against his shoulder, moving with a grimacing, grinding determination that said everything about the kind of man Foster was. The enemy turned back toward them, guns swiveled, voices shouted orders in that mix of languages. And then another shot came from the ridge, and another, and another. Every time an enemy soldier tried to establish a stable firing position on Walker's team, the shot came. Not always lethal, sometimes just enough to disrupt, to make a man flinch, to interrupt the moment of aim. But always precise, always deliberate. "They're protecting us," Collins said between breaths as they climbed. "Whoever is up there, they're covering our movement." "Keep climbing," Walker said. Behind them, the enemy made a decision. A group broke away from the main force. Walker counted 8, then 12, then more, and began moving toward the ridge, not toward Walker's team, toward the shooter. Walker saw it and felt something cold move through him. He did not know who was up there. He did not know their name or their unit or how they had come to be in this forest on this particular morning. But he knew what was about to happen if 20 armed men reached their position. "Collins," Walker said, "I see it. We keep moving." "Walker." "We keep moving," Walker repeated. "Right now, that shooter is the only reason we're still alive. The best thing we can do for them is get to higher ground, reestablish communications, and get help in here. That's the mission." Collins did not argue, but his eyes stayed on the ridge for a moment longer than they needed to. They kept climbing. And somewhere above them, hidden among the pines and the silence and the deep, patient shadow of the redwood forest, the shooter adjusted their position, checked the wind, and kept working. One shot at a time, one life at a time, making a decision that no one had asked them to make in a situation no one could have predicted for people they had never met, because that was who they were. And the forest for a moment went very quiet between shots. A silence full of hell breath and the knowledge that something extraordinary was happening in this valley. Something that would be spoken about in low voices for a long time after this day was finished. Walker reached the slope and did not look back. He trusted. He climbed. And he prayed in the way soldiers pray, not with words, but with the simple, desperate need for there to be something watching over the people who watch over others. Foster stumbled. Reed caught him. Collins fired twice to the south to discourage pursuit. And the shooter on the ridge fired once more, and the forest swallowed the sound and the circle of protection held. For now, the shot that killed the commander's executioner came from a direction nobody in that valley had been watching. That was the point. 320 yards to the northeast above the canyon floor. Above the tree line where the pines grew thick enough to swallow a person whole, Megan Carter pressed her cheek against the stock of her rifle and did not breathe. Not for the 3 seconds after the shot. Not while she tracked the next target. Not while her mind ran the calculations she had run 100 times in training and a handful of times in actual field conditions. Wind speed elevation, drop, target, movement distance correction with the cold mechanical efficiency of someone whose body had learned to separate the act of shooting from the emotional weight of what shooting meant. She breathed again only when she had confirmed the second target and was already moving her scope to the third. Megan Carter was 31 years old. She had grown up in Bozeman, Montana, the daughter of a wildlife biologist and a high school football coach, which meant she had spent her childhood outdoors and her teenage years learning that most problems could be solved with patience, preparation, and the willingness to do the uncomfortable thing when the comfortable thing wasn't working. She had joined the Marine Corps at 19 not because anyone pushed her toward it, but because she had looked at her options and decided that the most honest version of herself was the version that did something real in the world. The Corps had taught her to shoot. Her instructors had given her the foundation. But the instinct, the ability to read a battlefield, the way other people read a room to know where the danger was coming from, before it announced itself, that it had always been there. You could not teach that. You either had it or you spent your career pretending you did. Megan had it. She had earned her scout sniper qualification in a class that questioned her presence every single day for 11 weeks. Not loudly, not always directly, but in the small, persistent ways that people communicate doubt when they have decided someone does not belong. The slightly longer pauses before her input was acknowledged. The jokes that stopped when she entered the room. The evaluations that seemed to hold her to a standard that shifted whenever she met it. She had responded to all of it the same way. She shot better. She performed better. She outlasted every person who expected her to quit. By the time the qualification was finished, there was nothing left to argue about. The numbers did not leave room for argument. She had been selected for the classified reconnaissance program 8 months ago. The program did not have a public name. It operated in the space between agencies collecting intelligence on threats that were too sensitive for conventional units and too complex for standard law enforcement. Her handler, a compact gray-haired woman named Diane, who spoke in short sentences and never used more words than a situation required, had briefed her on the criminal network 3 weeks earlier. These people move weapons, Diane had said, not for ideology, for money, which makes them more dangerous in some ways because money does not care about principles and it does not get tired. She had slid a folder across the table. We need eyes inside that operation. We need to know who the buyers are, what they're purchasing, and when the next exchange is scheduled. We do not need a firefight. We need information. Understood, Megan had said. You go in alone. You come out alone. You do not engage under any circumstances. Understood. Diane had looked at her for a moment with eyes that had seen a great deal and had stopped being surprised by most of it. I mean that, Carter. This network has reach. They have people in places that would make you uncomfortable if I told you where. If this operation goes loud, it does not just compromise you. It compromises everything we've been building for 4 years. I understand the stakes, Megan had said. I won't engage. She had meant it when she said it. She had believed it completely when she inserted into the forest 6 days ago and began her careful, patient work, moving by night, lying still for hours at a time by day, eating cold rations and recording everything she observed through her scope with the disciplined thoroughness of someone who understood that the details that seemed small were usually the ones that mattered most. She had documented the layout of the weapons exchange site. She had counted personnel, photographed faces through her long lens, recorded license plates on the vehicles that moved in and out of the abandoned logging infrastructure. She had identified 3 men she recognized from intelligence files and 2 she did not. She had recorded everything. She had engaged nothing. She had been exactly as Diane required, invisible. And then on the morning of the 6th day, 4 men in American military equipment had entered the forest on the eastern approach. Megan had seen them through her scope before they were 100 yards into the tree line. She had recognized their equipment, their movement pattern, their tactical formation. She had also, in the same moment, recognized what was waiting for them. No, she had said out loud, to nobody, to the empty forest around her, to whatever part of her mind was still hoping she was misreading the situation. She was not misreading it. The criminal network had known the team was coming. The ambush was already in position, 60-plus fighters spread across the valley floor, and the lower slopes, each one placed with the kind of care that spoke to a military mind rather than a criminal one. They had done this before. They had done this to American operators before, and they were very good at it. Megan had watched the team enter the trap. She had watched the canyon swallow them. She had listened to the gunfire erupt and seen the team scramble for cover and seen one of them go down hard with a leg wound that even at 300 yards looked serious. She had watched the enemy tighten the circle with professional patience. She had watched the enemy commander step into the clearing and deliver his speech with the calm confidence of a man who had never lost. She had her rifle in her hands the entire time. She had not fired because her orders were clear, because Diane's voice was in her head, very quiet and very firm under any circumstances, because 4 years of intelligence work and the safety of people she had never met depended on this operation remaining invisible. She had held. Right up until the moment the commander gave the order to shoot Foster in the legs and let him scream. And something inside Megan Carter, something that had nothing to do with training or protocol or the careful architecture of a classified intelligence program, made its own decision. She fired. The shot covered 320 yards in less time than it takes to blink. The executioner, who had raised his weapon toward Foster, dropped. Clean, immediate. The commander spun toward the sound, but there was no muzzle flash to find no visible position, nothing to locate the shooter by. Megan was already moving her scope. Second shot. Machine gun operator on the eastern ridge. Gone. Third shot. The fighter advancing fast on the left flank, the one who had been about to close off the team's last viable movement option. Gone. The enemy broke. Not in panic, these were professionals, but they broke. The pressure on the canyon floor dropped. The team below began to move. Megan tracked their movement as she worked, keeping her scope on the threats rather than the friendlies, trusting the team below to be competent and use the opening she had created. She could see the big one, the broad-shouldered operator she would later learn was Reed carrying the wounded man. She could see the team leader directing movement with sharp, efficient gestures. They were good. They were going to make it if she kept the pressure off them. She kept the pressure off them. Shot after shot, each one placed with the deliberate care of someone who understood exactly how limited her ammunition was and exactly how much each round needed to accomplish. She was not trying to win a gunfight. She was trying to shift the mathematics of the situation to take a battle where 60 men were winning and make them feel like they were losing, or at least like they could not afford to stop paying attention to the ridge. It worked. For 11 minutes, it worked. Then the enemy commander, not the one she had shot in the first exchange, but his second in command, a lean and precise man who moved with the controlled economy of someone who had been in this kind of situation before, reorganized his force, and made the decision that Megan had known was coming from the moment she fired her first shot. He pointed at the ridge. He spoke to a group of his men, 20-25. She counted them as they assembled, and he pointed at the ridge, and he spoke for about 30 seconds, and then the group began moving uphill. Not toward the canyon, not toward the team she had been protecting, toward her. Okay, Megan said quietly, not to anyone, to herself, the way she always talked to herself in tight situations, a habit she had developed in training and never broken. Because it turned out that hearing a calm voice, even your own, did something useful to the part of your brain that wanted to make catastrophically bad decisions when the pressure hit. Okay, so that's happening. She did a rapid inventory, 31 rounds remaining in her primary supply, sidearm with 2 full magazines, a combat knife, field medical kit, no radio that could cut through the jamming, no backup, no extraction. The team below had reached the northern slope. She could see them climbing. Good. That was good. That was the right move, higher ground, better chance of getting above the jamming range, better chance of reestablishing communications. The problem was that the 25 men moving toward her were going to reach her position in approximately 6 minutes. And between now and then, if she stopped shooting the enemy, soldiers in the valley were going to redirect their attention toward the climbing team. So she could not stop shooting, which meant she could not run. Think, she told herself, think. She was not afraid, or rather, she was afraid in the technical sense that her heart was running fast and there was a sharpness behind her eyes that she recognized as the physical signature of extreme stress, but the fear was not in charge. She had worked very hard for a very long time to make sure the fear was never in charge. Repositioned, moved 40 yards north along the ridge to a secondary position she had identified on day 1 of the operation, a natural formation of rock and root that offered cover from the eastern approach in a clear line of sight down the valley. She settled into it, got her breathing back under control, picked up her scope, and went back to work. The men climbing toward her were good. She could see that immediately. They moved in a dispersed pattern that minimized the damage any single shot could do to the group. They used available cover consistently. They communicated with hand signals rather than voice. They were not contractors or hired security. Former military, she said. Eastern European based on the movement doctrine. Probably Spetsnaz or something derivative. She shot the point man. He was the one determining the pace and direction of the group's advance. Without him, they stopped, regrouped, and lost 40 seconds to reorganization. 40 seconds was a lot. She used them. Down in the valley, the remaining enemy soldiers were adjusting to the situation. Two of them trying to establish a new firing position that could reach the northern slope where the team was climbing. Megan shifted her scope, placed 2 shots in rapid succession, and the firing position was abandoned before it could be used. The climbing team did not look back. Good. They were trusting her, or trusting whoever was doing this. They did not know her name. They did not know her face. They just knew that something was watching over them, and they were using that fact with exactly the kind of disciplined competence she would have hoped for. Walker, she would think later. That was Walker's doing. Whatever he had said to his team when the shooting started, whatever decision he had made about how to respond to an unknown actor intervening on their behalf, it had been the right decision. He had trusted and moved. That was the correct call. She took another shot, 19 rounds left. The group climbing toward her had reorganized. They were moving again faster now, splitting into 2 elements. One that she could see, and one that had moved into dead ground to her left and was probably flanking. Smart, she acknowledged. No bitterness, just recognition. They were doing what she would have done. She shifted position again. 15 yards to the right, lower on the slope, sacrificing elevation for a better angle on the flanking element. She found them 4 men moving fast through a gully that they thought was concealed, and she fired once to disrupt them, and once more when the first shot caused them to bunch together instinctively, which was the wrong response but a human one. The main element above used her shift to close the distance. They were 200 yards below her now, close enough that as she could see faces when they moved from cover to cover. Close enough that the situation had changed from sniper operation to something considerably more personal. Okay, she said again, new problem. She ran the numbers, 13 rounds, 20-something men split into at least 3 elements. A flanking force she had disrupted but not stopped. A direct assault element that was going to reach her position in approximately 3 minutes regardless of what she did. And the valley below still needing attention if the climbing team was going to make it to the ridge without getting shot. There was no version of the mathematics that came out cleanly. She had known that when she fired the first shot. She had known at some level that choosing to enter this fight meant choosing to accept whatever the fight brought back to her. You did not get to make that kind of choice and then escape its consequences. That was not how it worked. She was not angry about it. She was not afraid in the way that produced paralysis. She was simply very focused and very clear and working the problem with everything she had. She fired 3 more times into the valley. All 3 shots disrupting enemy elements that were positioning to fire on the slope, and then shifted her entire attention to the men coming up the hill. The next 4 minutes were the most intense of her professional life. She moved constantly, never staying in any position for more than 2 shots, using the terrain the way she had taught herself to use it over years of training in landscapes exactly like this one. She made herself harder to find than she should have been. She made every round count in a way that forced the advancing group to slow, to hesitate, to keep choosing cover over forward movement. She bought time. Seconds at a time she bought time, and she spent every second she bought on the problem of keeping the team below alive. But she was alone, and there were a lot of them. The flanking element reached her left side at the same moment. The direct assault element crested the last rise below her position. She had 3 rounds left and no clean exit. A rock ledge to her right was a dead end. The trees above her were too open. The gully to her left was where the flanking element had come from. She had been in bad spots before. She had never been in a spot quite this bad. Carter, she said to herself, very quietly, "You've had worse." She paused. "No, you haven't." She almost smiled. "Figure it out anyway." She fired her last 3 rounds, 2 at the nearest members of the flanking element, 1 at the lead man of the direct assault, And then she was out of rifle ammunition, and the men were close enough that she could hear their breathing and the sound of their boots on the ground and the rustle of their equipment as they moved. She dropped the rifle and drew her sidearm. This was the part where being a scout sniper stopped being an advantage. At close range in confined terrain, with multiple opponents converging, the calculus shifted entirely. She was fighting on the wrong terms now. She knew it. She worked with it anyway. She shot the first man who came around the rock. She put the second man on the ground with a technique that had nothing to do with firearms and everything to do with the close quarters training she had done until it became reflex. She kept moving. She kept making them pay for every yard they closed. She kept refusing to become a target that stayed still long enough to hit cleanly. But there were too many of them. A blow she did not see coming caught her on the left side and took her off her feet. She hit the ground and was up again before they expected it, but the momentum had shifted. She was injured now. Not badly, not yet, but enough that the edge she had been maintaining through superior positioning and constant movement was starting to erode. Two of them came at her simultaneously from opposite sides, and she dealt with one and took a hit from the other that put her back against the rock ledge with no room left to maneuver. The man who had hit her stepped back and looked at her. He was breathing hard. So was she. The eyes were doing what eyes always did in that moment, reassessing, recalculating, adjusting to the fact that the situation was not matching the expectation. He had expected, based on everything his training and experience told him, to find a different kind of person up here. An older man, a larger man, a man. What he found was Megan Carter bleeding from a cut above her eyesight arm, raised back against the rock and completely unbroken. "You've been making our morning very difficult," he said. His English was excellent. Military trained, she noted automatically. The habit of assessment did not stop even here. "Sorry about that," she said. She was not sorry. "Who sent you?" "Nobody you'd know." He studied her for a moment. "You were supposed to observe. That was your mission. We knew you were here. We were watching you watch us." He paused. "Why did you intervene?" It was, she thought, a genuinely curious question. Not threatening, not rhetorical. He actually wanted to know. "Because I had to," she said. "No one made you." "I know." He seemed to consider this. Then he nodded slightly, almost respectfully, and raised his hand to signal his men. And then the tree line above her exploded. Not with gunfire from the enemy, with gunfire from Walker. Collins appeared from the left, firing with controlled precision, moving in the low, fast way of someone who had trained for exactly this kind of terrain and exactly this kind of close quarters fight. Reed came in from the right, and even here, even now, he was moving in coordination with Collins, two men who had operated together so long they did not need to communicate, who shared a tactical language. So deep it lived in the muscles and the instincts rather than the conscious mind. The enemy group that had cornered Megan found itself caught between the cliff face and two operators who were done with being hunted and had decided to do something about it. The fight was short. It was also extremely decisive. When it was over, Walker stepped forward and looked at Megan Carter. He looked at the rifle on the ground. He looked at the bodies of the men who had cornered her. He looked at the cut above her eye and the way she was favoring her left side. Then he looked at her face, and his expression did something complicated and quiet that she recognized as the look of a person trying to reconcile what they expected with what they found. "You're the one who's been shooting," he said, not a question. "Yes." "From 300 yards. 320 most of the shots." He was quiet for a moment. "How many?" She understood what he was asking. "I stopped counting at 14. Behind Walker, Collins let out a breath that was not quite a whistle. Reed said nothing, but he looked at Megan with the direct, unguarded respect of a man who did not perform emotions he did not feel. "Who are you?" Walker asked. She considered the answer. The honest answer was classified. The short answer was incomplete. The answer that fit the moment was somewhere between the two. "Marine reconnaissance," she said, "and special operations support. You were here alone, observing only." She paused. "Until I wasn't." Walker nodded slowly. "The man you shot first, the commander. His second took over. He's still in the valley." Walker's eyes sharpened. "Back to operational. How many total down there?" "I had 63 confirmed before the jamming made accurate count difficult. I've accounted for," he ran the number quickly, "I've taken 16 off the board. 19 counting what just happened here." She glanced at the tree line. You got more on the way up. 8, Collins said. Give or take. So roughly 40 in the valley plus the second in command. Walker looked at Reed. Reed looked at the slope below them. Foster's on the ridge. I've got him propped behind good cover, but he needs extraction fast. The leg is... Reed paused. Fast. Radio, Megan asked. Still jammed. The jamming equipment is in one of the vehicles at the exchange site. She said this without emphasis, but watched Walker's eyes pick it up immediately. Silver panel van eastern perimeter of the logging structure. Take out the van, the jamming stops. Walker stared at her. You know the layout of the site. I've been here 6 days. Another silence. This one felt different from the others, like the moment before a decision solidifies. Okay, Walker said finally. He said it the way Megan had heard commanders say it, when they had processed all available information and arrived at a course of action and were now simply done with the deliberation phase. Here's what we're going to do. And standing on a ridge in the Northern California wilderness, wounded and outnumbered and operating far beyond the boundaries of anyone's original plan, 4 people who had never met before 30 minutes ago became something that did not have a formal name, but that every soldier who had ever been in a real fight would have recognized immediately. They became a team, and teams, when they are real ones, are very difficult to defeat. The second in command in the valley below was about to find that out. Walker did not waste time on a long briefing. Long briefings were for situations where you had the luxury of time. This was not that situation. Here's the problem, he said, looking at Megan, Reed, and Collins in quick succession. 40 armed men in the valley, 1 communications jammer in a silver van at the exchange site, 1 wounded teammate on the ridge who needs a medevac inside the next 30 minutes or the leg becomes a life. He paused exactly 1 second. Here's the solution. We take out the van, we get comms back, we call in extraction, we hold until it arrives. 4 of us against 40, Collins said. Not an objection, just a confirmation of the arithmetic. 3, Reed corrected. He glanced at Megan. No offense. None taken, Megan said. And 4, I can move. Reed looked at the cut above her eye and the way she was keeping weight off her left side. You sure about that? I've been moving for the last 40 minutes while 25 of those men were specifically trying to stop me. I think I can manage. Reed looked at Walker. Walker looked at Reed. Something passed between them that needed no words. 4, Walker confirmed. Collins was already checking his remaining ammunition. I've got 2 magazines, plus what's in the rifle. 14 rounds in the handgun. I've got 1 full magazine in the sidearm, Reed said. Walker did a quick count of his own supply. Similar, Megan. She had reloaded her sidearm from the equipment of the men on the ridge. 2 full magazines for the sidearm. No rifle ammunition. She paused. I can use a rifle if someone can spare one. Collins looked at the weapons on the ground around them. 3 rifles from the men they had just fought, each with partial magazines. Take your pick. She chose the best maintained one without hesitation. Checked the action, checked the optics, seated a magazine, and was ready in under 12 seconds. Collins watched her do it with the expression of a man quietly revising an estimate upward. Okay, Walker said. The van is at the eastern perimeter of the logging site. Megan, you know the layout better than any of us. You're on point for navigation. Reed, you've got left flank. Collins right. I'll take center. We move fast and we move quiet for as long as quiet stays possible. The moment we're compromised, we go loud and we go straight at the objective. No hesitation, no detours. The van is the mission. Everything else is secondary. He looked at each of them. Questions. Nobody had questions. Foster, Reed said. I know, Walker said. He's got maybe 30 minutes. I know Marcus. Reed nodded. Walker had used his first name. That was all the acknowledgement either of them needed. They went down the slope in a diamond formation, Megan leading the 3 SEALs, covering angles with the smooth automatic efficiency of people who had done this type of movement so many times it had stopped being a conscious process and become something closer to breathing. Megan adapted to their rhythm within the first 30 seconds. She was not a SEAL. She had not trained with these specific men, but she was good enough and smart enough and situationally aware enough to read what they were doing and fit herself into it without creating friction. Walker noticed this, filed it, kept moving. The valley floor was still active. The remaining enemy force Walker counted approximately 35 visible personnel, which meant roughly 5 unaccounted for somewhere, had reorganized after the chaos of Megan's shooting and the team's escape. They were methodical now, spreading out, searching the edges of the valley systematically, looking for survivors, looking for the shooter they had sent 25 men after and who had not yet been confirmed dead. That last part worked in the team's favor. "They don't know we're together," Megan said quietly, barely above a breath. "They still think they're looking for isolated targets." "How long before that changes?" Walker asked. "When they find the ones we left on the ridge. Maybe 10 minutes. Then we have 10 minutes of confusion to work with." Walker made a decision. "We use it all." They hit the first enemy patrol at the edge of the logging infrastructure. 2 men moving together, checking a row of vehicles parked along what had once been a lumber road. They were alert but not alarmed, still in the searching for isolated survivors phase, rather than the responding to active threat phase. Collins took the nearest one before the man knew he was there. Reed took the second, simultaneously, the timing so precise that neither man made a sound capable of carrying to the main force. "Time check," Walker said. 0652, Collins said. They were 22 minutes into what Walker was now mentally calling Phase 2 of the worst morning of his career. The logging structure was more extensive than Walker had expected from the aerial surveillance that had formed the basis of the original mission briefing. He mentioned this as they moved through it quietly between positions. "The surveillance data was sanitized," Megan said. She said it without particular emphasis, the way you state a fact you've had time to process and make peace with. "Whoever prepared your intelligence package removed details that would have indicated the scale of this operation." "You're saying someone inside the preparation chain?" "I'm saying what I observed for 6 days doesn't match what I'm guessing you were briefed on." She paused at a corner, checked the angle, moved through. "Draw your own conclusions." Walker drew them. He did not like what he drew. He set it aside for later, the way he had been setting things aside for later all morning, building a mental file of things that needed to be addressed once the immediate problem of not dying had been resolved. "Silver van," Megan said. 40 yards, eastern perimeter." Walker looked. She was right. The van was parked with its rear facing the main exchange area, a practical choice that allowed the jamming equipment inside to broadcast in all directions without the vehicle structure interfering. 2 guards on the near side, unknown on the far side. "I need 30 seconds to get into position on the far side," Megan said. "When I'm there, I'll signal. You take the near side guards. I'll handle whatever's on my side, and then we put the van out of commission." "What's your signal?" Collins asked. "You'll know it when you hear it." Collins looked at Walker. Walker nodded. Megan disappeared into the gap between 2 equipment sheds with the unhurried, utterly controlled movement of someone who had been doing this specific thing, moving invisibly through dangerous spaces for long enough that it no longer triggered the adrenaline spike it would have triggered in most people. 28 seconds later, they heard it. A sharp, brief whistle, the kind that could be mistaken for a bird, except there had been no birds in this forest all morning. Walker and Collins moved on the near-side guards with the coordinated speed of a system that had been refined through hundreds of hours of training and a number of real-world applications that neither man would ever discuss in any room that did not have the appropriate security clearance. The guards went down. Reed covered the approach from the north. On the far side of the van, Megan had already handled her side. "Clear," she said. Walker tried the van's rear doors. Locked. He looked at Collins. "Allow me," Collins said, and dealt with the lock in a way that took 4 seconds and produced no unnecessary noise. The jamming equipment inside was military grade. Eastern European manufacturer. Walker noted the same origin as the movement doctrine he had observed in the enemy fighters. This was not a criminal network that had acquired military equipment. This was something considerably more organized than that. "Can you disable it?" he asked Megan. She was already looking at it. "I can destroy it. Give me your smallest breaching charge." "That's going to make noise. Everything from here forward is going to make noise. The question is whether our radios work when it does." Walker handed her the charge. She placed it with the quick, precise confidence of someone who had done demolitions work before and was not in the habit of second-guessing her own judgments. 20 seconds. Get clear. They got clear. The charge was small in shape, designed to direct force inward rather than outward. The sound it produced was a sharp crack rather than an explosion, significant but not massive. Enough to be heard. Enough to matter. Walker brought the radio to his mouth before the echo had finished. "Extraction team, this is Walker. Authentication Kilo 7 Foxtrot. Do you copy static for 2 seconds that felt like 2 minutes? Then Walker, this is extraction lead. We copy. We've been trying to raise you for 38 minutes. What is your status? 4 personnel, 1 critical casualty on the Northern Ridge grid to follow. Active hostile force in the valley, approximately 35 personnel armed and organized. We need a medevac and we need a QRF and we needed both about 35 minutes ago. Copy that. We have 2 assets airborne. ETA your position 18 minutes. Tell them to expect ground fire. Understood. Send the grid for the casualty. Walker turned to Reed, who had Foster's grid already in his head. Reed always had the grids in his head. It was one of the things Walker had come to take entirely for granted over 6 years, and Reed called the coordinates in a flat, quick voice that carried no emotion because there was no room in that moment for emotion, and they both knew it. Moving to secure the casualty, Reed said the moment the transmission ended. He was already oriented toward the northern slope. His entire body was aimed at it the way a compass needle aims at north. Not dramatic, not loud, just completely certain. Go, Walker said. Collins and I will cover from here. Megan, he looked at her. Up to you. It was the first time since they had come together on the ridge that he had given her a genuine choice. She understood what he was doing. He was acknowledging that she was not under his command, that she had already done more than anyone had asked her to do, that whatever came next was hers to decide. I'll stay on the eastern approach, she said. If the main force pushes this direction when they hear the charge go off, they'll come that way. You're low on ammunition. I know how to make it last. Walker looked at her for a moment, really looked the way you look at someone when you are trying to understand who they are, and finding that the available information is both insufficient and somehow more than enough. Okay, he said. Watch your angles. Watch yours, she replied. The enemy responded to the charge going off in the way Walker had anticipated. Fast and organized, the second in command, directing his force toward the sound with the disciplined speed of someone who had identified the threat and was committing resources to neutralize it. 3 elements, Walker counted as he watched from between the equipment sheds. 2 pushing from the south, 1 from the west. Smart distribution. It covered the most likely escape routes and pinched toward the center where the van was. They're good, Collins observed. Keep reminding yourself of that, Walker said. Don't underestimate them for a second. Never have. The southern elements hit the van position first and found it empty. The second in command, Walker, could pick him out by the way the others oriented toward him. The subtle gravity of authority that always made a commander visible, if you knew what to look for, moved through his men with sharp gestures reorienting them. Scanning, thinking. He stopped. He looked at the eastern approach. He said something to 2 of his men and pointed directly at where Megan was. He knows, Collins said. He's guessing, Walker said, but he's guessing right. He keyed his radio. Megan, eastern approach. He's sending people. Her response came back steady and immediate. I see them. 6 men. Can you hold a pause that lasted exactly long enough for her to assess the situation honestly? For a while. 14 minutes until the assets arrive. Another pause. Define a while as 15 minutes and I'll make it work. Walker almost smiled. It was not the moment for smiling, but almost. Collins, Walker said, yeah. We need to split his attention. Collins understood immediately. You want to go at him directly. I want him looking in 3 directions at once. When he's looking in 3 directions, none of those directions gets his full focus. That's a theory. It's a solid theory. It requires us to walk directly into 35 armed men. Roughly 30, Walker said. We've been accounting for some. Collins was quiet for a moment. Then, you know what's funny? Nothing about this morning is funny. No, I know, but you know what's funny anyway. What? I could be home right now. I had leave approved. I volunteered for this operation. You always volunteer. I know, Collins said. I'm starting to question that as a life philosophy. Question it later, Walker said. Right now, go left, I'll go right, and let's see if we can make 30 men feel like there are more of us than there are. They went. What followed was 11 minutes of controlled chaos that Walker would later describe in his official report using language so precise and unemotional that anyone reading it without context would have no idea how close every single one of those minutes had come to being the last. He and Collins did not try to win the firefight. They tried to dominate the tempo of it to keep the enemy reacting, rather than initiating to keep the second-in-command managing problems, rather than creating them to consume the enemy's attention so completely that nobody had bandwidth left to consolidate and press. It was working, not comfortably, not cleanly, but it was working. Then Reed's voice came over the radio, and the tone of it, a particular flatness that Walker had learned over 6 years, meant Reed was managing something serious cut through everything else. Walker, Foster's in bad shape, worse than I thought. Walker fired twice without stopping moving. How bad? The field dressing didn't hold. He's lost a lot of blood. He's conscious, but... A pause. He's talking about Lily. Walker knew what that meant. When a man started talking about his daughter in the field, it meant the adrenaline was metabolizing and the shock was setting in, and the body was beginning to do the calculus of what it might and might not survive. ETA on assets, Walker asked, knowing Collins was tracking. 11 minutes, Collins called from somewhere to Walker's left. Reed, you need to hold him 11 minutes. I know that. Talk to him. Keep him talking. I know that too, Walker. Tell him. Walker stopped himself. There was nothing to tell Foster through Reed that would make 11 minutes shorter. Tell him Lily's picture is on that refrigerator because she knows exactly who her father is. And he's going to be the one who takes it down when he gets home. Silence on the radio for 3 seconds. Then Reed's voice, slightly rougher than it had been. Copy that. Walker put his focus back on the immediate problem, which was that the second-in-command had identified Collins's position and was directing a 5-man element to flank him from the north. Collins north 5 coming north. I see 4. There are 5. I'll find the 5th. The 5th came from a direction that should not have been accessible through a gap in the equipment structure that the aerial surveillance had shown as blocked, but which was evidently not blocked, another piece of intelligence that had been either wrong or deliberately falsified. The 5th man was fast and smart and came in low, and Collins almost did not see him in time. Almost. The sound of Collins's sidearm firing 3 times in rapid succession, the 3-round controlled pair, and an insurance round, a signature Collins had developed and Walker had borrowed because it worked, told Walker that his operator had handled it. I found the 5th, Collins reported. Good. Walker, I'm at 4 rounds. 4 rounds. Walker did a rapid internal accounting of his own supply. 6 rounds in the rifle, 7 in the sidearm. Not enough. Not remotely enough for 10 more minutes of this kind of engagement. Megan, he said into the radio. Status. Her response came back, and underneath the words, he could hear something that had not been there before: a tightness, a compression, the sound of someone managing pain while simultaneously managing a tactical situation. Still holding the eastern approach. I've slowed them down, but I can't stop them. They're working around my right side. Can you pull back toward the ridge? If I pull back, they push through and they'll find Reed and Foster. Walker knew she was right. He also knew she was hurt and alone and running out of options. How many rounds, he asked. Enough, she said. The way she said it told him clearly that enough was not many. 9 minutes until the assets arrived. Walker made a decision. Collins, on me, we're going east. What about the main force? We buy Megan time, she buys Foster time. The assets arrive and we deal with whatever's left after that. Collins appeared at Walker's shoulder in under 10 seconds. They moved east at a run, not bothering with stealth. Now, stealth was a tool for a specific phase of an operation, and that phase was conclusively over. They found Megan 40 yards east of the van position. She was behind a piece of logging machinery, firing in short controlled bursts toward a group of enemy fighters that had gotten closer than Walker would have liked. She was pale. Left side of her jacket was darker than it should have been. She did not look at them when they arrived. She was too focused on the problem in front of her. About time, she said. You said a while, Walker replied, taking a position on her left. I meant it relatively. Collins took the right. 3 people against however many were pressing the eastern approach. Walker counted 8, visible in the mathematics, which had been unfavorable all morning, were still unfavorable. But they were better. 3 people sharing a defensive position with a clear field of fire, and the knowledge that help was 8 minutes away was a different equation than 1 person alone. They held. The second in command, somewhere in the valley behind them, was clearly reorganizing. Walker could feel it the way you feel. Weather changing in the patterns and the tempo of what you could hear in the small signs that an experienced commander sends before a major push. The enemy was going to make a concentrated effort. One final push to end this before whatever air assets were inbound could arrive. He's going to come at us all at once, Walker said. I know, Megan said. All three positions, he'll push everything he has left. I know, she said again. She fired once, twice. Walker. Yeah. If the assets don't make it in time, they'll make it. If they don't, Megan, I just want to say don't, Walker said firmly, not unkindly, firmly, the way you speak to someone when you need them to stay in the present and not let their mind go to a place that will cost them the focus they need. Save it. Say it after. There's an after. She looked at him for the first time since they had arrived at her position. Really looked. Then she nodded once and turned back to the problem in front of her. There's an after, she agreed. The push came 4 minutes later. Every remaining fighter, the second in command, had driving hard from 3 directions simultaneously, the most concentrated and coordinated action they had seen all morning. It was impressive in the way that things can be impressive even when they are actively trying to kill you. Walker and Collins and Megan gave ground slowly, and with great cost to anyone who tried to take it. Reed's voice came over the radio, reporting that he had eyes on the approaching fighters and was in position to support from the ridge above. 4 people. Roughly 25 fighters remaining, friendly side. It was by every rational measure still a losing equation, then the sound of rotors. Distant at first, then less distant, then unmistakably close, the deep rhythmic percussion of military helicopters, moving fast and with purpose, coming in from the east over the ridge, and with them a sound that Walker had been waiting for all morning. His radio crackled. Walker, this is Raptor Lead. We have eyes on your position. We have eyes on multiple hostile targets. Say the word. Walker said the word. What happened next lasted 4 minutes and was later described in the official report with the same precise, unemotional language that Walker always used, and it accomplished in 4 minutes what the team had spent the previous hour trying to accomplish by themselves. When it was finished, the valley was quiet. The second in command, the lean, precise man, who had organized this operation with military intelligence and military tactics in the absolute certainty of someone who had done this before and always won, was the last one standing. He was on his knees in the center of the logging area, his hands visible, and he was looking at Walker with an expression that was complicated and hard to read, and contained somewhere in its depths something that was not quite surprise but was close to it. Walker stood in front of him and looked down. The jammer, Walker said, the sanitized intelligence. The redirected extraction team. Someone helped you plan this. The man said nothing. We're going to find out who, Walker said. Everything that happened here today is going to get examined by people who are very good at examining things. And when they find the thread, and they will find the thread, it's going to lead somewhere, and wherever it leads, you could have been the person who took us there first. He paused. Or not. Your call. The man looked at Walker for a long moment. Then he said one word. One word that was a name that Walker recognized, a name that told him in the space of a single syllable that the operation he had walked into this morning was not a criminal weapons exchange with an intelligence overlap. It was something considerably larger, considerably more dangerous, and considerably more deeply embedded in places that were supposed to be trustworthy. Walker's face did not change. He looked at Reed, who had come down from the ridge with Foster stabilized and conscious and arguing with the medevac team about whether he actually needed to be carried or could walk, which was a good sign. The best kind of sign, the sign of a man who was going to go home to his daughter and take the picture down from the refrigerator himself. He looked at Collins, who was sitting on the ground reloading his weapon with the methodical focus of a man who needed something concrete to do with his hands while his mind processed the morning. He looked at Megan Carter, who was standing 20 feet away, being assessed by a paramedic who had arrived with the second helicopter and who was clearly trying to get her to sit down and clearly losing that argument. She was watching Walker with an expression he could not quite categorize, not pride, not relief, something quieter than either of those things, something that looked like the particular piece of a person who had made a hard choice and could live with it. Walker walked over to her. The paramedic looked at him with the expression of someone seeking backup in an argument about wound management. Walker ignored this. The name he gave me, Walker said quietly, just to her. I heard it, Megan said, just as quietly. You know it. She looked at him steadily. I know it. How long have you known it? She was quiet for a moment. Not the quiet of evasion. The quiet of someone choosing their words with care because the word mattered and she was not going to waste them. Long enough, she said, that this morning was not entirely a surprise to me. Walker absorbed this. He absorbed it the way he absorbed all significant information completely without immediate reaction, letting it settle into the part of his mind where things got properly examined before they got responded to. We're going to need to talk, he said. I know, she said, extensively. I know that too. After you let this man do his job, Walker said, nodding at the paramedic who was still waiting with the expression of a professional who had run out of patience but had excellent self-control. Megan looked at the paramedic, looked at Walker, looked at the paramedic again. Fine, she said, but I'm not getting on a stretcher. Nobody said anything about a stretcher, the paramedic said carefully. Good, Megan said, because I'm not getting on one. Walker left her to it and walked back to where Reed was standing, watching Foster be loaded onto the medevac with the focused attention of a man monitoring a situation until he was absolutely certain it was resolved. He's okay, Walker said. He'd better be, Reed said. I told him he's okay. He'll be home to Lily by the end of the week. Reed was quiet for a moment. The name that man gave you. Yeah. Is it as bad as your face says it is? Walker considered lying. It lasted about a quarter of a second. It's worse, he said. Reed nodded slowly. He looked at the valley around them, the logging structures, the vehicles, the silver van, with a shaped charge hole in its side, the evidence of a morning that had started as a straightforward reconnaissance mission and had become something else entirely. Then we deal with it, Reed said. Yeah, Walker agreed. We deal with it. High above them, the medevac banked east toward the nearest trauma center carrying Ryan Foster and the story of the morning with it. And in the quiet that followed the sound of rotors fading, Walker stood in the middle of the California wilderness and looked at the three people who had made it through this day with him and felt something that he would not have been able to name with precision, but that lived in the same territory as gratitude and respect in the particular bone-deep awareness of what it means to have been genuinely, unreservedly helped by someone who had no obligation to help you at all. The second helicopter touched down in a cleared area north of the logging structure at 0741 hours, and Walker stood 30 feet away, watching it with the expression of a man who had stopped performing composure and was now simply inhabiting it. The morning had cost something. He could feel it the way you feel a muscle you have been depending on, suddenly reminding you it has limits. Not broken, not even close to broken, but present, real. The kind of weight that made itself known in the quiet moments between the moments that required you to be operational. Reed appeared at his shoulder. It was a habit so ingrained that Walker no longer consciously registered it. Reed arriving precisely when Walker needed someone there, not saying anything, just being there. 6 years of that, 6 years of Marcus Reed understanding that sometimes the most useful thing a person could do was stand beside someone and not require anything of them. The prisoner is secured, Reed said. Moan. Second helicopter brought 4 personnel from the agency team. They have him. Good. They wanted to brief you on site. They can want whatever they'd like. Walker watched the medevac carrying Foster shrink to a dot against the morning sky and disappear over the eastern ridge. We debrief at the facility, not here. Reed did not push it. He would relay that information with exactly the right tone, respectful of the agency team's authority, completely clear about Walker's position. And it would happen the way Walker said it would happen, because Reed was extraordinarily good at being the person between Walker and the things that needed to be managed. Collins is with Megan, Reed added. Walker looked east. Collins had stationed himself near the paramedic's position with the entirely transparent excuse of keeping watch on the perimeter, and was actually doing what any observant person could see he was doing, keeping an eye on Megan Carter, making himself available, and engaging her in the kind of low-key conversation that was really just a skilled operator's way of monitoring whether someone was okay without making them feel monitored. It was good instinct. Walker approved of it without saying so. How bad is she? Walker asked. Reed considered his answer with the care he always applied to assessments of people's physical condition. He had enough field medicine experience to know the difference between what people said about how they were doing and what their body was actually telling. Bruised ribs, definitely. Cut above the eye needs stitches, significant but not critical. The left side, he paused. She took a hit during the fight on the ridge. Could be a cracked rib. Could be worse. She is not going to tell you unless you specifically ask her directly and make it clear that you're asking as a person rather than as someone assessing her mission status. Walker filed this. She's not going to want to go to the medical facility. No, Reed agreed. She's going to want to go wherever the debrief is happening. Because of the name. Because of the name. Walker turned it over in his mind again. The name the second in command had given him. One word, one syllable. The name of a person who sat in a position that made the intelligence leak not just a security failure, but something considerably darker. A deliberate act of exposure, an attempt to destroy not just this operation, but the 4 men who had been sent into it. The name of someone who had known exactly what was waiting in that forest and had sent Walker's team in anyway. He breathed in through his nose and out through his mouth and did not let his face do anything that the agency people or the helicopter crew or the various personnel now moving through the logging site needed to see. The name changes the scope of this, Reed said. Yes. Significantly. Yes. Reed was quiet for a moment. You knew him. It was not a question. Reed knew Walker well enough to read the particular quality of the restraint Walker was exercising, and that quality had a specific signature, the signature of someone managing a response to something personal rather than simply professional. I knew him, Walker confirmed. Worked with him. Twice. Both times I thought. He stopped. Started again. He was good. I thought he was one of the good ones. Reed absorbed this. People surprise you. Yeah, they do. Sometimes better than you expected. Reed glanced toward Megan. Sometimes worse. Walker nodded. He looked at the logging site, the evidence of an operation that had been months in the planning, that had involved military-grade equipment and former special operations personnel, and an intelligence penetration so deep that it had altered aerial surveillance data and redirected an extraction team with false orders, and he understood that what had happened this morning was not the end of something. It was the beginning of something. Something that was going to require a great deal of careful, patient, dangerous work to fully understand and fully address. He also understood that the work was going to start today, right now, whether he was ready or not. Tell the agency team we'll be ready to move in 20 minutes, Walker said. Reed started back. Walker stopped him. Marcus. Reed turned. Thank you, Walker said, simply, without elaboration, because some things did not need elaboration, and this was one of them. Reed looked at him for a moment. Always, he said, and went to relay the message. Walker walked east to where Collins and Megan were positioned. Collins registered Walker's approach and found somewhere else to be with the practiced discretion of a man who had learned when his presence was needed and when it was not. He did this smoothly enough that Megan might not have noticed it as the deliberate act it was, might not have. Walker suspected she noticed everything. The paramedic had finished his assessment and was filling out paperwork with the focused air of someone who had done everything he could and was now documenting it. Megan was sitting on a section of timber, which told Walker that Reed's assessment of her ribs was probably correct and that standing for extended periods was currently costing her more than she would admit, with her hands resting on her knees and her eyes on the middle distance. Walker sat down beside her, not across from her where the positioning would have suggested interrogation or authority, beside her where it suggested something more like equality. She glanced at him, said nothing. The agency team wants a full debrief, Walker said. I know. They're going to ask about your mission, what you observed during the 6 days before this morning, your intelligence on the network. I know that too. There's going to be a conversation about the fact that you broke protocol by engaging. Megan was quiet for a moment. When she spoke, her voice was level and completely free of defensiveness. I made a decision. I'll account for it. You don't seem worried about that conversation. I'm not. She looked at him directly. Are you? It took him a moment to understand what she was asking. She was asking whether he was going to support her account of the morning. Whether the official record, which Walker's testimony would significantly shape, was going to reflect the reality of what she had done and why, or whether it was going to be shaped by institutional priorities that might find it inconvenient to credit an unauthorized engagement by a solo operative from a classified program that was not supposed to exist in any official record. No, he said, I'm not worried about that conversation. Something in her posture eased slightly. Just slightly. She was not a person who showed relief, obviously, but the small adjustment was there if you knew how to look. The name, she said. Tell me what you know, Walker said. Let's start from the beginning. She gathered herself, not dramatically. She was not a dramatic person. She gathered herself the way a person does when they are about to say something they have been carrying for a long time and have spent a long time deciding how to say. 3 months ago, she began, my handler received a communication from inside the network, a source, someone who had been in a position to observe the network's operations for approximately 2 years and had reached the point where they wanted out. They provided information about the weapons exchange, the location, the timeline, the personnel involved. She paused. They also provided something else, a name, someone inside the American intelligence infrastructure who had been facilitating the network's operations, providing cover, sanitizing data, running interference. The same name the second in command gave me this morning, Walker said. Yes. Your handler reported this. My handler reported it through appropriate channels. Her voice did not change. The report was received, acknowledged, and then another pause. Nothing happened. Walker processed this. Nothing. Nothing visible. No investigation, no action. The operation against the network continued on its existing track, which was my program's observation mission and a separate law enforcement effort that had been ongoing for years. She looked at him. Then 3 weeks ago, I was briefed on an upcoming military reconnaissance operation in the same area where I was already deployed. I was told the operation had been assessed as low risk, 15 personnel, maximum at the site, local contractors. The words hit Walker like a physical thing. He kept his face still. You knew the brief was wrong, he said. I knew what I had observed for 3 weeks, she said carefully. I knew what the site actually looked like. I knew the personnel numbers were at least 3 times what the brief indicated. She held his gaze. And I knew the name of the person responsible for producing that brief. Walker was very quiet for what felt like a long time, but was probably about 10 seconds. You knew we were walking into a trap, he said. I knew the intelligence you were operating on was severely compromised. I did not know with certainty that it was a deliberate trap rather than a catastrophic failure of the intelligence process. She paused. I reported my concerns to my handler 48 hours before your team inserted. And my handler told me the operation had been reviewed at a level above her authority and confirmed it as viable. She told me to maintain my mission parameters. So you were told to stay invisible? Yes. But you stayed anyway in the area with your rifle. Her eyes did not waver. I stayed because I had reported what I knew, and it had not been acted on, and I was not willing to be somewhere else if I turned out to be right. Walker looked at her for a long moment. He thought about what it meant to know what she knew to report it and be ignored to stay anyway on the chance that she might be able to do something if the worst happened. He thought about the 6 days alone in that forest, eating cold rations and watching a weapons exchange through a long-range lens, carrying the knowledge that the men coming into this valley were coming in blind. You couldn't warn us, he said. It was not a question. He was working it out as he said it. If you broke cover to warn us, you revealed your program's presence in the operation. You exposed your source, and you handed the person whose name you knew a reason to shut down everything your program had built. There was no clean option, she said simply. There was no version of this where nobody paid a price. She looked out at the valley. I made a judgment call about which price was worth paying. You judged that our lives were worth more than the operational security of your program. I judged, she said, that I was not going to watch Americans get killed in a trap that I knew about and did nothing about. The rest of it, she gestured slightly with one hand. The rest of it is what it is. Walker understood her completely. He understood her in the way that you understand people who share a fundamental set of values, even when they have arrived at those values through entirely different routes. She had not fired that first shot because protocol told her to. She had fired it because she was the kind of person who could not fire it, who had looked at the situation and found that no version of herself that she could live with would have kept that rifle quiet while Foster bled into the California dirt. When he had been the same way once or twice in situations he still did not talk about. The name Walker said, when we debrief, you're going to have to say it on record. I know. That's going to move fast. The moment it's on record, it's going to move very fast and very visibly. I know that too. It's going to be complicated for your program, for your handler. Yes, for you. She met his eyes. Lieutenant Walker, I made my decision 300 yards above that canyon when I chose to fire that first shot. Everything that came after that was the consequence of that decision, and I knew it, and I fired anyway. A beat. I'm not going to get cautious about consequences now. Walker stood. He offered his hand. She looked at it for a moment, then took it. Her grip was firm. She winced slightly with the ribs when she put pressure on the arm, and Walker noticed it and did not mention it because she would have found the mention patronizing, and she would have been right. Let's go debrief, he said. The debrief happened in a mobile command facility that the agency team had staged 6 miles from the forest, a converted vehicle with acoustic shielding and encrypted communication links. In the particular institutional smell of recycled air and institutional coffee that Walker associated with every formal intelligence facility he had ever been inside. There were 4 agency personnel, a senior analyst named Harrigan, who had the manner of someone who had conducted a great many sensitive debriefs and had learned to keep his own reactions entirely invisible during them. A lawyer, a technical specialist, and a 4th person who was introduced only by a first name Daniel and who sat in the corner and said nothing during the first 40 minutes, but whose presence carried the specific gravity of someone whose authority significantly exceeded their visible rank. Walker gave his account first. He gave it chronologically accurately and without editorializing, because editorializing in a formal intelligence debrief was the kind of thing that gave people grounds to question your objectivity, and Walker was not going to give anyone grounds for anything. He described the mission briefing, the insertion, the ambush, the communications failure, the sniper support, the ridge, the approach to the van, the destruction of the jamming equipment, the counterattack, the prisoner, and finally, clearly, without hesitation, the name. The room went very still when he said it. Harrigan's face did not move. The lawyer made a note. The technical specialist stopped typing. Daniel in the corner looked at the table in front of him with an expression that Walker could not read. You're certain of what the prisoner said, Harrigan said. Completely. A prisoner under stress in a combat situation is capable of saying whatever serves his interests, Walker agreed. I'm aware of that. I'm also aware that the name he provided corresponds precisely to what Petty Officer Carter's independent intelligence assessment had already identified through 3 months of observation. He looked at Harrigan steadily. That's not a coincidence. Another silence. Petty Officer Carter's program, Harrigan said carefully, her presence in the operational area was the reason 4 American operators are alive this morning, Walker said. His voice did not change. I want that on the record very clearly before we discuss anything else. Daniel looked up from the table. He studied Walker for a moment. Then he looked at Megan, who was sitting across the table with her hands folded and her expression composed in the way that said she had prepared herself for this room and everything in it. Petty Officer Carter, Daniel said. It was the first time he had spoken. His voice was quiet and measured. Your handler reported your concerns about the intelligence integrity of this operation 48 hours prior to the insertion. Yes, Megan said. That report was received by the office I work for. He paused. It was assessed and a decision was made to proceed with the operation as planned. The room absorbed this. Who made that decision? Walker asked. Daniel looked at him. I did. The silence that followed was the most loaded silence Walker had experienced all morning, which was a significant distinction given the morning he had had. He looked at Daniel. Daniel met his gaze without flinching. I made the decision to proceed, Daniel continued, because acting on Carter's intelligence report would have required us to reveal to the subject of that report that we were aware of his activities. We were not yet in a position to move against him. If we moved prematurely, he would have run. 4 years of investigation into this network would have been destroyed, and a man who has done considerably more damage than this morning's events would have disappeared into whatever infrastructure he had prepared for that contingency. So you chose to let us walk into an ambush, Walker said. I chose to proceed with the operation while implementing what I believed were sufficient precautionary measures to. What precautionary measures? Walker's voice was still level, completely level. The levelness of it was more unsettling than anger would have been. Daniel was quiet for a moment. Measures that proved insufficient, yes. 4 men, Walker said. One of them is in a trauma center right now with a destroyed leg. The three others survived because of the unauthorized action of one person who had been specifically ordered not to engage. I understand that. I want to make sure you understand it very clearly. Lieutenant Walker. Daniel's voice was also level. Two men who were very good at keeping their voices level in a room where the thing that needed to be said was being said with great care around all of its edges. I understand the cost of this morning better than you know. I am not here to justify an outcome that I did not want and did not intend. I am here because the name you provided this morning, the name Carter's intelligence had already identified, means that today's events have created an opportunity that did not exist yesterday. Walker watched him. He doesn't know what the prisoner said, Daniel continued. He doesn't know that Carter's intelligence and your prisoner's statement corroborate each other. He knows that the operation this morning failed. He will be managing the fallout from that failure. He will be concerned, possibly concerned enough to make a move we can actually capture and document. He paused. Which is the only kind of move we can use. We cannot act on intelligence from a prisoner in a classified program alone. We need something documented, something unambiguous. You're going to use what happened this morning, Walker said slowly, as bait. I'm going to use what happened this morning, Daniel agreed, as an opportunity. Walker looked at Megan. Megan looked at Walker. What passed between them in that look was not a conversation. It was more like a simultaneous recognition. Two people arriving at the same understanding at the same moment. The morning was not over. It had not been about a weapons exchange. It had not even really been about the ambush. It had been about building the conditions for something larger. Whether that had been Daniel's intent from the beginning or whether he was now adapting to the outcome, Walker was not yet sure. He suspected it was some combination of both. The most dangerous kind of intelligence official was not the cynical one or the corrupt one. It was the one who genuinely believed that the outcome justified the cost and who was smart enough to make that case coherently. What do you need from us? Megan asked. Directly, without preamble. Daniel looked at her. Something in his expression shifted slightly, acknowledgement perhaps of the particular quality of directness she was offering. Everything you observed during your 6 days in the forest, he said, every face, every vehicle, every conversation you could hear or lip read, every exchange of goods, every communication pattern you noticed. He paused. And your assessment of the source who provided the original intelligence, their reliability, their position, their motivation. That's going to take several hours, Megan said. Yes. My handler has been contacted, Daniel said. She's been read into this conversation. A pause that carried weight. She's unhappy. She has a right to be, Megan said. She reported what I found and it was buried. It was managed, Daniel said carefully, imperfectly. People almost died. Yes, he said it without equivocation. People almost died. That is the accurate description of what happened as a result of how this was managed. He held her gaze. I'm not going to tell you that was acceptable. I'm going to tell you that the world this program operates in does not always offer acceptable options, and that the people who work in it sometimes make decisions that cost more than they should. I've made those decisions. I'll make them again. I hope I make them better in the future because of what happened this morning. Megan looked at him for a long time. Carter's program, she said, not Megan, she said. Carter's program. It stays operational. Yes. My handler keeps her position. Yes. And the record of this morning accurately reflects the contribution of this unit and the decisions made within it. Daniel looked at Walker, then back at Megan. That's not typically how classified operations are documented. I know how they're typically documented, Megan said. I'm telling you how this one is going to be documented. Another silence. This one had a different texture than the earlier ones. This one felt like a negotiation reaching its conclusion. Yes, Daniel said. Walker watched Megan process this. She was not satisfied, he could see that. Satisfaction was not what the situation warranted, but she was resolved. There was a distinction and she understood it, and she was going to work within it. Reed appeared at the door of the facility. He looked at Walker with the expression that said he had information. Walker stepped out. Foster, Walker said immediately. Out of surgery, Reed said. The leg is going to be okay. They're saying full function. It's going to take time and work, but... Reed stopped, cleared his throat. He's going to be okay, Walker. Walker looked at the ceiling of the mobile facility for exactly 2 seconds. 2 seconds was all he permitted himself. Good, he said. His voice came out slightly rougher than he intended. Reed noticed, did not comment. Collins wants to know if we're going to be here much longer, Reed said. He used polite language to ask that question, which I can tell you represents significant personal restraint on his part. Tell Collins we'll be a few more hours. He's going to be very politely frustrated by that. Tell him to be politely patient. Reed almost smiled. How's the debrief going? Walker considered the honest answer. We started the morning trying to survive an ambush in a redwood forest. Now we're in the middle of something that involves people with significantly more institutional authority and significantly less willingness to get shot at. Which is more dangerous? Reed asked, not sarcastically, genuinely. Walker thought about it. I'll let you know, he said. He went back inside. The debrief continued for 3 hours and 40 minutes. It covered the ambush, the intelligence failure, the prisoner's statement, and 6 days of Megan Carter's painstaking intelligence collection in enough detail to build the kind of documented case that Daniel needed. By the end of it, the evidence against the name they were not yet saying publicly was substantial enough that even a careful, well-resourced man would have difficulty surviving its emergence intact. By the time Walker walked out of that facility into the afternoon light of Northern California, he knew 3 things with certainty. The man whose name had been spoken in that valley was going to face a reckoning. Ryan Foster was going to walk his daughter to school again. And Megan Carter alone in a forest with a rifle and a decision and the absolute refusal to do the wrong thing, because it was the easier thing, had not just saved 4 lives that morning. She had changed the direction of something much larger. The forest behind him was quiet now, no gunfire, no rotors, no sound of men moving through trees with weapons and the intention to use them. Just the deep, indifferent silence of old-growth wilderness settling back into itself, the way it always did, the way it always had, carrying in its bark, in its soil, and its 300-year-old roots, the evidence of every human drama that had ever played out beneath its canopy and then passed. Walker stood in that silence for 30 seconds. Then he put it behind him and walked toward whatever came next. The drive back to the staging facility took 40 minutes, and Walker spent most of it looking out the window at nothing in particular and thinking about everything in general. Collins was in the front seat. Reed was beside Walker in the back. Nobody talked. That was one of the things Walker valued most about this team. They understood that silence after a hard operation was not emptiness. It was processing. It was the necessary work of a mind, sorting through what had just happened and filing it in the right places so that it did not become the kind of thing that showed up uninvited at 3 a.m. for the rest of your life. Megan was in a separate vehicle behind them with 2 of the agency personnel and her paramedic, who had apparently decided that she was his personal responsibility until a proper medical facility made that argument moot. Walker watched her get into the vehicle without argument, which told him her ribs were hurting more than she was letting on. Megan Carter did not accept assistance easily. When she accepted it without protest, it meant the alternative was genuinely painful. I thought about what Daniel had said in that mobile facility. The careful, precise, institutional language that Daniel used to describe decisions that had cost real people real things. Walker had dealt with men like Daniel before, men who lived in the space between what was right and what was necessary, who had spent so long in that space that they had developed a sophisticated internal vocabulary for why the 2 things were not always the same. He did not entirely distrust Daniel. He also did not entirely trust him. That seemed like the appropriate response to a man who had allowed 4 operators to walk into a known trap because pulling them back would have spooked a target he had been hunting for 4 years. The arithmetic was not simple. Walker understood that. Complex operations required complex decisions, and complex decisions had costs. And the people who made those decisions at the highest levels were not, in Walker's experience, universally cynical or universally self-serving. Sometimes they were simply people who had accepted a terrible responsibility and were doing their imperfect best with it. That did not make Foster's leg whole. But it was the truth, and Walker had a deep, stubborn commitment to the truth, even when it was inconvenient. Walker, Reed said, "Yeah, you've been quiet for 35 minutes. I'm aware. That's long even for you." Walker looked at him. "What do you want me to say, Marcus?" Reed thought about it. "Nothing in particular. I just wanted to make sure you were still in there." "I'm still in there." Good. Reed looked back out his window. Collins is also still in there, in case you were wondering. I wasn't wondering, Collins said from the front without turning around. I'm very visibly present. You've been very quietly present, Reed said. I was giving Walker his processing time. That's considerate. I'm a considerate person. Walker listened to this exchange and felt something loosen in his chest, just slightly, just enough to remind him that this specific texture of conversation, this particular kind of low-key human noise from people who had been through something together and were finding their way back to normal was one of the things worth surviving for. One of the real things. Foster called, Collins said. His voice shifted when he said it, became more careful. About 20 minutes into the debrief, Reed took the message. Walker looked at Reed. He's out of recovery, Reed said. They've got him in a room. Reed paused and Walker watched him manage something briefly before continuing. He's asking about us, wanting to know everyone's status. He's in a hospital bed with a reconstructed leg, and he's asking about us, Walker said. That's Foster, Collins said simply. Walker reached into his jacket pocket and found his phone. 3 missed calls, 2 from numbers he recognized as administrative contacts within his command structure, and 1 from a Virginia area code that he recognized as the landline for Ryan Foster's house, his wife. He stared at that last one for a moment. His wife called me, he said. Neither Reed nor Collins said anything. Walker called the Virginia number. She picked up on the second ring. Her name was Christine, and she had been a military spouse for 9 years, and she had the particular brand of composure that military spouses develop, not the absence of fear, but the management of it, the way you fold it small and keep it somewhere accessible but not dominant because you have children to raise and a life to maintain and a husband who needs to know that the world he comes home to is stable. Lieutenant Walker, she said. No preamble, just his name, and in his name all of the questions she was not asking out loud. He's okay, Walker said. The surgery went well, full function expected. He's already asking after his team, which is the most Ryan Foster thing I've ever heard. The sound she made on the other end of the line was very small and very private, and Walker looked out the window while it happened, because some moments belonged only to the person having them. Thank you, she said when she had put herself back together, for bringing him back. Walker thought about the honest answer to that, about the shot that had come from 300 yards away before Foster could be executed, about the decision Megan Carter had made in a fraction of a second that had altered the outcome of the morning entirely. There was a lot of help, he said. Ryan's okay because a lot of people did their jobs today, including Ryan. Can I see him? Call the facility directly. They'll arrange it. Tell them Lieutenant Walker authorized the contact. It'll cut through some of the administrative delay. I'll do that right now. A pause. She stopped. Are you okay? The question surprised him, not because it was unexpected. Christine Foster had always been the kind of person who looked at the people around her husband with the clear-eyed awareness that they were also human beings carrying things, but because it landed with more precision than he was currently prepared for. I'll be okay, he said, which was not quite the same thing as yes, but was honest. Take care of yourself, she said. Ryan talks about you like you're the reason he does this job. I think you should know that. Walker did not have a response to that. He thanked her and ended the call and looked at the phone in his hand for a moment before putting it away. The vehicle was very quiet. Everything all right? Collins asked. Christine says hi, Walker said. She didn't say hi, did she? No, but she would have if she'd known I was going to say that. Collins nodded, faced forward again. They arrived at the staging facility at 11:34 hours. The facility was a leased property, a former agricultural equipment depot that the agency used for exactly this kind of transitional operation staging, and it had the slightly improvised, deliberately anonymous quality of everything the agency touched at the operational level. Functional, forgettable, exactly right for its purpose. The vehicle with Megan pulled in 2 minutes behind them. Walker was out of his vehicle and walking toward hers before he had consciously decided to do it. She stepped out with the careful, controlled movement of someone managing pain without advertising it, and the paramedic stepped out behind her with the expression of a man who had given up the battle of getting her to rest and was now simply maintaining proximity as his only remaining strategy. Medical facility, Walker said. Not a question. I know, she said. Today. I was just told that by approximately 4 different people. Consider this the fifth. She looked at him with an expression that occupied the territory between exasperation and something warmer than that. I need to send a communique to my handler first. She needs to hear directly from me what happened in that debrief. You have 30 minutes. That's not enough time. It'll have to be. She studied him. You're going to stand there until I go, aren't you? I'm going to stand here and have a very normal conversation with you about completely unrelated topics until 30 minutes have passed, at which point I'm going to drive you to the medical facility myself if necessary. You don't know where it is? I'll find it. She almost smiled. It was the same almost smile he had seen in the forest in the moments between the moments when everything was trying to kill them. This small private expression that surfaced when something struck her as genuinely funny, but that she had trained herself not to fully release in operational contexts. He was starting to recognize it. He thought it was one of the more honest things about her. Fine, she said, 30 minutes. She went inside. The paramedic followed her with the dedication of a man who had decided this was his purpose in life now. Walker watched them go and then turned to find Reed standing beside him. You know, Reed said, when this morning started, I had a very specific set of expectations about how today was going to go. And none of them included any of what actually happened. That's usually how it goes. I know. You'd think I'd have adjusted my expectations by now. Reed paused. She's something. Walker did not answer immediately. He thought about what Reed was saying and what he was not saying, and he sorted carefully between the two. She made a decision this morning that most people would not have made, Walker said finally. She was alone, she had clear orders to stay invisible, she had every professional and institutional reason to hold that rifle still, and she fired anyway. Because she could not, Reed said. Because she could not, Walker confirmed. Reed was quiet for a moment. You know the agency is going to have a complicated relationship with that fact. They are going to want to credit the outcome without fully crediting the decision that created it. Because if you fully credit the decision, you validate breaking protocol, and they can't have that as a precedent. I know. So her official record is going to accurately reflect her contribution, Walker said. I made that clear in the debrief, and it was agreed to. Reed looked at him. Daniel agreed. Daniel agreed. And you trust that agreement? Walker considered it honestly. I trusted enough to document my own account in detail and ensure that documentation exists in places that are harder to lose than a classified file. Reed nodded slowly. This was Walker operating in the register that Reed knew best. Not naive, not cynical, but strategically realistic. Trust but document, credit but verify. Work within the system while maintaining enough independent footing that the system could not entirely rewrite what you knew to be true. Smart, Reed said. I've learned from experience. Painful experience. The best kind. Inside the facility, Collins had located coffee. Real coffee, not the recycled institutional variety, and had produced 3 cups with the quiet efficiency of a man who understood that caffeine was as much a tool of operational recovery as any medical intervention. He handed one to Walker, one to Reed, and kept one for himself, and the 3 of them stood in a loose triangle in the facility's main room and drank without talking for a full 2 minutes. It was, Walker thought, one of the better 2 minutes of the day. Then his phone rang. The number on the screen was one he had not expected to see today. Not this soon, not given everything that was currently in motion. It was the number for Admiral James Carver, Walker's direct superior, a man who did not call casually. Walker answered. Sir. Walker. The Admiral's voice was what it always was, measured, precise, carrying the weight of significant authority without needing to announce it. I've been briefed. By Daniel. By Daniel and by 2 other parties whose names I'll share with you when we're on a secure line. Where are you? Staging facility outside the operational area. Moving to medical in approximately. Walker looked at his watch. 20 minutes. Are you injured? No, sir, I have 1 critical casualty who is post-surgery and stable. 3 others with minor injuries. Carter. Walker noted that the Admiral used her last name without any qualifier or context. Not Petty Officer Carter, not the Marine sniper, just Carter, as though he had been briefed on her specifically and had formed a view. She's here, Walker said carefully. She needs medical attention, but she's functional. I want to speak with her. Walker processed this. Sir, with respect, she's not under my command. She's a separate program. Her handler. Her handler has been briefed and has no objection. I want to speak with her, Walker. Bring her to the phone. Walker looked across the room to where Megan had just emerged from the communications room. Her handler call apparently complete. She met his eyes, registered his expression, walked toward him with the composed alertness of someone who has spent their career reading situations and acting on what they read. It's Admiral Carver, Walker said quietly, hand over the phone. He wants to speak with you. Something moved across her face. Not surprise exactly. More like the recognition of an expected development arriving on its expected schedule. She took the phone. Sir, she said. Then she listened. Walker watched her face as she listened, which told him almost nothing because she was very good at listening without her face telling the story of what she was hearing. She said, yes, sir, twice, and I understand once, and no, sir, it was not, once, with a particular emphasis on the not that suggested the Admiral had asked whether her actions this morning had been sanctioned. Then she said something that Walker did not expect. Sir, with respect, I'd ask that whatever decision is made about my program or my status comes after the current operational window closes. If we move too quickly on the administrative side, it could signal to the subject that his exposure is more complete than he currently believes. A pause. Yes, sir, I understand the risk. I'm asking you to accept it. Another pause, longer this time. Thank you, sir. She handed the phone back to Walker. I want to speak with you again, she said. Her voice was completely neutral. Walker took the phone. Sir? What's your read on her? The Admiral said. No preamble. Walker looked at Megan. She had walked away, not dramatically, not far, just enough to indicate that she was giving him the space to answer honestly. It was another thing he noted about her. She was always thinking about the right configuration of a situation. Always positioning things to get the most honest possible outcome. My reading, Walker said, is that she is one of the most capable people I have encountered in a very long time. And that what she did this morning lost her professionally, and she knew it would cost her, and she did it anyway. Because the Admiral said. Because she's the right kind of person, Walker said simply. A pause on the Admiral's end. When he spoke again, his voice had shifted almost imperceptibly, lost a layer of the institutional register, and become slightly more personal. My grandson is 8 years old, Walker. He's going to inherit the world that decisions like this morning's get made in. I think about that. Yes, sir, Walker said. Good work today. All of you. Another pause. Get your people medical attention and get me a preliminary report by end of business tomorrow. Understood, sir. The line went quiet. Walker stood with the phone in his hand for a moment. Then the door of the staging facility opened and Daniel walked in. This was the moment Walker had been expecting and had not been looking forward to. Not because he feared the conversation. Walker did not fear conversations, even difficult ones, but because he knew this particular conversation had a subtext, and the subtext mattered more than whatever was said on the surface. Daniel looked at Walker, then at Megan, then back at Walker. The subject has moved, Daniel said. The room snapped to attention. Not physically. The three SEALs did not move. But the quality of attention in the room changed in the way it always changed when new operational information arrived, a sharpening, a focusing, an immediate subordination of everything else to the new data. Moved how? Walker asked. Packed a bag, left his residence 40 minutes ago. He's using a vehicle that's not registered to him, which tells us his preparation for this contingency was further along than we believed. Daniel's voice was controlled, but Walker could hear the tension underneath it. The specific tension of a man watching a carefully constructed operation start to shift in ways he had not fully planned for. He knows something, not everything, but enough to be cautious. The prisoner talked, Megan said. It was not a question. We believe there was a secondary communication protocol. If the exchange went wrong, an automatic alert. You didn't account for a dead man switch, Walker said. Daniel's jaw tightened slightly. We accounted for several contingencies. This specific variant was not among them. Megan was already thinking through it. Walker could see it in the way her eyes had gone to the middle distance, the processing look he had first noticed on the ridge when she was calculating distances and wind corrections and target sequences. But she was not calculating ballistics now. She was calculating something else. His most likely destination, she said. Given what I observed about the network's infrastructure over 6 days, there are two nodes outside U.S. jurisdiction that he would trust. One is a financial structure in a jurisdiction I won't name out loud. The other is a physical location. She looked at Daniel. You know about the financial structure? Yes. Do you know about the physical location? A pause that lasted 1 second too long. No, Daniel said. I do, Megan said. The room absorbed this. How, Daniel asked? Because the source who provided the original intelligence about this network was not only inside the network's financial operations. They were inside his personal trust structure. They knew things about him that his own organization did not know. She looked at Daniel steadily. Things I reported to my handler 3 months ago that did not make it into your operational picture. Daniel looked at her with an expression that combined several emotions Walker found interesting to observe: professional respect, institutional frustration, and the particular humility of a man who has just realized that the information he needed had been available and had not reached him. Where is the location? Daniel said. It's in my full intelligence report, which I submitted to my handler, who submitted it through channels where it, she paused delicately, apparently encountered friction. Daniel was quiet for a moment. Then, what do you need to give me that location right now? Nothing, Megan said. I'll give it to you right now. I've been trying to give it to relevant parties for 3 months. She gave him the location, specific, precise, the kind of detail that only comes from a source who was genuinely inside the circle of trust. Daniel had his phone out before she finished the second sentence. What happened in the next 4 hours, Walker was not present for most of. That was by design. The operational response to a high-value subject in motion belonged to people with different authorities and different resources, and Walker's role in it was to provide his account, ensure his team was accounted for, and stay available for follow-up questions. This was the part of the work he found hardest: the standing back, the trusting that the machinery would now handle what needed handling, the acceptance that his piece of the morning was complete. I went to the medical facility with Megan as promised. The doctor confirmed 2 cracked ribs. The cut above her eye required 6 stitches, and there was bruising extensive enough that the doctor said things about it with the careful understatement of someone trying not to alarm a patient who had clearly already made peace with the extent of her own damage. Megan sat on the examination table and listened to the doctor's assessment with the patient, attentive expression of someone who is receiving useful technical information and intends to act on it responsibly. She did not minimize. She did not argue. She said understood, and how long, and what are the restrictions, with the focused practicality of someone treating her own body as an operational asset that required maintenance. Walker sat in the chair in the corner of the room. He had not been asked to be there. He had simply followed her in and sat down, and nobody had told him to leave, which he chose to interpret as permission. When the doctor was finished and had left them to wait for discharge paperwork, the room was quiet for a moment. 6 stitches, Walker said. Could have been more, Megan said. How are the ribs? Present, she said, reminding me they're present. That's what cracked ribs do. I know, I've had them before. Of course you have. He paused. Montana. She looked at him. What? You grew up in Montana. Bozeman, I think. Her eyes narrowed very slightly. How do you know that? Daniel's team ran a background during the debrief. Standard protocol. Reed told me. Reed read my file. Reed has a gift for finding information that's technically accessible and practically useful. It's one of his best qualities. Walker paused. Bozeman, Montana. Father was a wildlife biologist. Mother taught high school. You played varsity volleyball for 2 years before you decided you preferred being outdoors to being in a gymnasium. Megan was looking at him with an expression he had not seen on her face before. Not quite guarded, more like surprised, which was interesting because she did not seem like a person who was easily surprised. Why are you telling me that? She asked. Because you've spent the last 8 hours being known only by what you could do. Your shot distance, your round count, the intelligence you collected, the tactical value of your presence on that ridge. He met her eyes. You're also a person from Bozeman, Montana. I thought that was worth acknowledging. She was quiet for long enough that he thought she was going to deflect it. Let it go past without responding. Close the door on the personal the way she had clearly trained herself to do in professional contexts. Then she said, my father used to take me into the mountains every fall, not to hunt, just to look. He said if you could be completely still and completely quiet for long enough, the world showed you things it hid from people who were in a hurry. She paused. I think that's why I became a sniper. Not because I liked the weapon, because I was already good at the still and the quiet. Walker nodded. It was the most she had offered about herself in the entire day, and he recognized it for what it was. Not a lowering of the guard exactly, but an acknowledgement that the guard did not need to be up all the time. Not here. Not now. What happens to your program, he asked. The question he had been holding back. Daniel says it continues. The Admiral confirmed it. She looked at her hands. There'll be a review. There always is after something like this. People will ask questions about the decision to stay in the operational area and the decision to engage and whether those decisions were within my authority. And they were not within my authority, she said directly. I exceeded my mandate. I know that. I'm not going to pretend otherwise. She looked up. I'm also not going to pretend I would do it differently. Even knowing especially knowing the cost. Her voice was steady, not defiant, simply certain. If the only version of me that follows orders is the version that lets people die to preserve operational security, then I don't want to be the version that follows orders. Walker looked at her for a long moment. He had known a lot of people in his career, good ones and bad ones and many in between. People who were brave in the technical sense, who could function in dangerous conditions, and people who were brave in the harder sense, who could make the right decision when the right decision cost something real. The two categories overlapped, but they were not the same, and the second category was considerably smaller than the first. When you're through the review, Walker said, and the program is stable again, I want to work with you. She blinked. It was the most visible surprise she had shown all day. Your team doesn't work with outside programs, she said. My team works with whoever is the right person for the mission, Walker said. Today establish pretty clearly who you are. She studied him, looking for the qualification, the caveat, the institutional asterisk. There was none. Okay, she said. 2 days later at 0614 hours on a Thursday morning, a man traveling under a name that was not his own attempted to board a private flight from a small airport in a jurisdiction that Megan had named in that staging facility. He was detained by people who had been waiting for him for 11 hours. His phone and his personal effects were seized. The financial structure was frozen within 6 hours of his detention. The physical location Megan had described was searched and produced documentation that the agency's legal team described as comprehensive in a way that almost never happened at this stage of an investigation. Daniel called Walker that evening. It's done, he said. Walker thought of the morning in the forest, the silence before the ambush, Foster on the ground. The first shot from 300 yards that had changed the entire trajectory of the day. Is it? He said. The subject is in custody. The network's primary infrastructure is neutralized. The intelligence we've built will support prosecution. A pause. It's done, Walker. Walker accepted this. Carter gets full credit in the record. She does. In writing. In writing, Daniel confirmed. Then after a moment, she saved your lives, Walker. That's in the record. That's not going to be qualified or minimized or lost in a classification that nobody can access. Another pause. I'm not the villain of this story. I know, Walker said. Villains don't usually call to confirm the paperwork. There was something that might have been a brief, reluctant laugh on Daniel's end. Then good night, Lieutenant. Good night. Walker sat with the quiet phone in his hand for a moment. Then he called Foster. Foster picked up on the third ring, his voice carrying the slightly flattened quality of someone on post-surgical pain management. But underneath it, Walker could hear Foster, the real one, present and clear, and already thinking about what came next. Hey, Foster said. Hey, Walker said. How's the leg? Physical therapist says I'm ahead of schedule. A pause. She also says I'm annoying. You're showing off. I'm recovering efficiently. Same thing with you. A beat of silence. The comfortable kind. Lily drew me a picture, Foster said. His voice changed when he said it, went somewhere warmer. She drew the whole family, me, Christine, her. She drew me with 2 working legs. He paused. I asked her how she knew my leg was going to be okay. She said because I always come home. Walker did not say anything for a moment. She's right, he said finally. Yeah. Foster's voice was rough at the edges. Yeah, she is. Rest, Walker said. Physical therapist or not rest. Walker. Yeah. The woman on the ridge. Foster had clearly been briefed on the basics. His team always briefed each other on the basics. Tell me about her. Walker thought about how to answer that. About 320 yards and a decision made in a fraction of a second. About 6 days alone in a forest and a report that was ignored, and a woman who stayed anyway because she had decided that her presence might matter. She's from Bozeman, Montana, Walker said. Her father took her into the mountains when she was a kid and taught her how to be still. A pause. That's it, Foster said. That's enough, Walker said. You'll meet her. He ended the call and sat for a long time in the quiet of his temporary quarters, thinking about the morning that had started as a simple reconnaissance mission and had become something else entirely. About the way one decision made by one person alone, with no authorization and no guarantee, and nothing but the clarity of their own conscience to guide them, could alter the direction of an entire day, could alter the direction of everything that came after. The forest in Northern California was quiet now. The logging infrastructure had been seized and documented and would eventually be dismantled. The weapons that had been staged for exchange were in federal custody. The network that had used this wilderness as its operational base had been effectively destroyed by the combination of what had happened in the valley and what had followed it in the 4 days since. None of that happened because the plan worked. It happened because a woman with a rifle and a choice had looked at the only version of herself she could live with and chose it, without hesitation, without negotiation, without asking anyone's permission to do the right thing at the exact moment when doing the right thing was the hardest possible choice available. That was the truth of the morning in the redwood forest, not the ambush and not the rescue and not the prisoner and not the name that had set 4 days of consequence in motion. The truth was simpler and more durable than any of those things. When everyone else's plan had failed, one person refused to fail with it, and that made all the difference. And that was the kind of difference that did not expire.